My name is Nautica Jenkins, and I have been working with Project South since I was 17 years old. And I'm a graduate of the Septima Clark Community Power Institute. I have worked closely with youth groups that organized the National Student Bill of Rights, and I was a part of the hashtag 10 Mil for Real campaign that organized to demand the severing of the contract between Atlanta Public Schools and Atlanta Police Department. I got a chance to participate in the 2018 UPEC held in Senegal with the Project South delegation, where I actually met Vingi and others, and I'm excited to be in conversation with Dázon, who has been a major leader in Atlanta for many years on serious issues like HIV/AIDS and reproductive justice. Today, we recognize International Women's Day with a conversation that spans the continent and the African diaspora. We lift up the power of Black women fighting against state repression all over the globe. Project South recognizes all women, including trans women and non binary gendered people, as warriors against violence, poverty, and social control. So, to start our conversation, we would like you guys to introduce yourselves and let us know what initially brought you into movement organizing and also what keeps you going.
So you need me to tackle that one first?
Yeah, you can go first if you want to.
I'll do that, taking a little bit of opportunity to say thank you also for the invitation. And I can't believe it, as cold as it is outside. Why do I have a mosquito? Okay. So the heat we've had over the last couple of days, I guess. So I am so excited to be here, and compliments and a wonderful International Women's Day to everybody who is participating in our meeting today or our conversation today, and wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing to lift up the contributions of women. Salute. So I am Dázon Dixon Diallo, founder and president of SisterLove. We're 33, coming up on 33 years of working at the intersections of sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice, with a primary lens on HIV for most of that time. We work both in Atlanta and around the United States, mostly in the deep South, but we're also based for almost 23 years in South Africa. We've had offices in a couple of different places. I am originally from Paix County, Georgia. Some people know that as Fort Valley. Born and raised in the state of Georgia, and attended Spelman College for undergrad, and then went on to do my master's level work at University of Alabama at Birmingham in maternal and child health. I'm a co-founder of SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, as well as a whole bunch of other things. I'm an Aries, so I start things. Yep, it's my birth month. And what I would say really that got me into the movement and into movement and organizing, start with my parents, honestly, because I grew up in a small town in Georgia in the 60s and 70s as a kid anyway, where in my house, because I grew up in a Black college town, Fort Valley State, there was a lot of activism. There was a lot of movement work. There was a lot of things that were happening very locally. So not involved in the big national things. I'm not one of those whose parents went to the March on Washington, but I am one of those whose parents ran for office in the 70s as a way to integrate things. I am a person who came from organizing, whether it was in the church or with students. So that's what I learned, and got to Spelman College and immediately, first week, became involved in the anti-apartheid movement on my campus. So when people talk about the student movement in the US that helped bring an end to apartheid, I was a part of that movement. So that led me into it. What got me into this kind of work is that same Ariesness where things were going wrong, and especially for Black women in the reproductive health and rights space. But and there was nobody there that was responding to it in a way that made sense, or that even included Black women, including the feminist organization where I worked, right? And so it became a necessary thing of that. Before FUBU, we knew it was FUBU, right? It had to be, if not us, then who? So it had to be something created by Black women for Black women who were dealing directly with not just AIDS at the time, but all of the intersections that happened because of what makes the disparity of AIDS so real for so many people who are Black and brown in this country. But for Black women, it's global, bearing the weight and the brunt of the intersections of gender-based violence, of sexual violence, of gender inequality and inequity, and also in terms of access to health care and health information and inclusion in the responses to these things. So that's what got me motivated. And it's those same very women who are survivors and responding to this day who keep me involved.
Thank you, Dázon. Now we're going to move to Vingi. What initially brought you into movement organizing, and what keeps you going, Vingi?
Thank you very much, Nautica. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be a part with you this night in Congo, because now we are trendy. We are trendy hour, and what then I can say, I'm Vingi Mahamba. I am a citizen movement which called Lucha, which work in DRC, and which is some of his part in Europe and USA. And I'm also part of the Africa platform, which brings together African citizen movement in all the African continent. But now I am working as a social therapist to support service of trauma healing, because as you know, DRC have many experience of war, and there is many people who is traumatized, and I do that as my job. Why join the fight? It was around 2012 when I was still a student, and the first time when we began to create Lucha, our citizen movement, the objective or the motivation was to link to the problem of access to employment of young. In this period, first following to have a job was a big problem, because the request of several years of experience was a big problem of assessment in the employment of young. Then many young who accessed the employment had temporary contracts, which were terminated in no time. Most of young was vulnerable, and any time was solicited in the armed groups who was exposed the young to enter into many violence. Then Lucha was beginning in the context who was like that, to fighting to see how Lucha can help the problem of employment of young. But when we have progresses in our fighting during our struggle, we realize that we are taking the problem in a superficially level, and then we review our vision of struggle, and we redefined our vision for social justice and human dignity. We are given the mission to contribute to making the people demanding and the rulers accountable. Si je peux le dire en français, rendre la population exigeante et les autorités redevables. Parce que le problème, on avait trouvé que c'était plus au niveau de la gouvernance qu'au niveau individuel. If any can translate, please.
I did not pick that up, other than she was saying that they were shifting or linking the individual problems to the level of the government and the government's creation of those problems. With respect, especially to youth employment.
Okay, thank you. Can I continue, please? Okay. Donc, what drives me forward? First of all, the notoriety that we have received both locally and nationally, even internationally, the confidence of the people who are counting on us for change in the country, and the model that we have become for other activities, other citizen movements all over Africa, in the country. And last thing is the hope that a new country will be built by us. That is all I can say about the motivation that will give us the drive to continue our struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vingi. So our next question is, what are some of the most pressing threats affecting women and non-binary gender people on the front lines that you work? And we can start with Dázon. That's okay.
So I'm grateful because I think Vingi just laid out some of those core issues already. And I would probably easily be able to just go, ditto. Or I echo that and have a good seat. But and I don't want to, we don't have to unpack it too much or go too deep in it to understand that for women and non-binary people, especially those who are identified as femmes, females, or even those who are assigned female at birth, are still not getting the respect even in their own masculine or non-binary identifications, right? That there's a concomitance of things that for any of us, there's, as I say, people live intersectional lives. Therefore, the responses need to be intersectional because the oppressions are intersectional, right? And so some of the most pressing threats, like right now, and they're not all centered in health, even though that's where I'm coming from. Health is where things start and end because that's people's well-being and quality of life. So violence, gender-based violence, sexual violence is still, I think, the number one most pervasive, systemic, inculcated with white supremacy and patriarchal formation of control and of power grabbing and power keeping, power holding. And so violence against bodies that are female-centered, female-centric are absolutely, any of the different violences are actually still core threats. But there are some that I include, like the erasure of women and who we are and what we've contributed, what we do, the essentialness of who we are as human beings, but who we are also as women in all our diversities. The issue of the erosion of our rights right now, whether it's in the reproductive health and rights space, whether it's in criminalization across the board, whether it's in political participation. In the United States, it looks a little different because we're fighting against that pressure. So the more we fight, the few wins we have. For the opposition, it looks really big, right? It's sort of like truth only scares people who don't live in truth, right? So it's the same thing that what we have been able to make happen, the way they talk, the way we all organize around voting. Your vote would not be under threat, people wouldn't be coming after our votes if they didn't understand how important our votes are, right? Same thing for women in our power, is that for women in our diversity, Everybody else understands how powerful we are. We don't always understand that, and therefore we end up being, our rights are eroded because we don't know the power that having our full human rights would mean. So in terms of our full human rights, there's also the inclusion issue. The inclusion versus exclusion matter, I don't think continues to come down the lines of gender as much, because we have so many competing siloed issues of people. But inclusion of our issues, our lived experiences, our indigenous expertise as people who are women and femme identified in policies, in program making, program design. So it's not just the they, it's not just the governments, it's people in our own work, in the progressive movement, in the democracy efforts, in human rights movements, who still don't make sure that there's an inclusive thought of the women's experience. And that, of course, includes research, which is where I live a lot too, whether it's opposition research, operational research, clinical research, basic science, social and behavioral, it doesn't matter. It's not understanding the full context of what it means in terms of living in female space is a huge threat to us not being able to be at the table, to serve the table, to set the table, to have the menu that we want on the table. That all of that is hugely threatening our ability to really lift ourselves and move ourselves forward. While at the same time, if we use all of these notions, the human rights platform, intersectionality, our social design, we actually win. And that's why those issues are so much of a threat. And if we put it in the context of human rights, y'all would speak, I'm speaking to the choir, as they say. But once we put it in the context of human rights, it sort of doesn't always dismantle, but it disarms a lot of the other arguments that they just can't defend once you use the human rights approach and framework.
And I wanted to piggyback off of your point around some of these threats happening within the health services portion of our society. I personally noticed that after I watched my best friend give birth, and just that process of being in the hospital with her and how they handled her, it was very in my opinion unethical and very dismissive of her feelings and how she wanted to be handled in that situation. And so I think one big threat for Black women and non-binary gender people in that space is the stereotypes and assumptions that are placed on these bodies and the malpractice that is part of the history of how we got to where we are with our healthcare system. Like, so many tools that were created through pain and suffering of the bodies of Black women. So I think that's a huge threat for people.
You hit the nail on the head, Nautica. There's a couple of statements that I think we should have a whole session about. One was everything begins and ends with Black women. Everything. You cannot deny it. I don't care how you slice it. Everything begins and ends with us. And so even with regard to childbirth and with birth, labor, and delivery, we've known the secrets, we've known the tools, we've known what it takes to have the safest, most healthy and loving experiences with childbirth. And most of that has been erased from what we consider medical practice these days, right? And so that's a big part of the story that you're telling, is the indigenous context from which we come still has a role to play even now when it comes to. Somebody said the other day that the future of justice is in birth. And that's because when we raise and include and train and facilitate the leadership of people who give birth, then they give birth to energy and spirits that come up in a different way. And that's how we change the future. So thank you. I'm glad you brought that in, because it's so true. Just listen to the people. They know their bodies. Straight up.
Yes, absolutely.
As Loretta Ross would say, even Serena Williams is, all the money and power she has, did not surpass the fact that as a Black woman, she was not listened to when she was talking about her body in her after her birth. So, right on.
Precisely. Thank you. And Vingi, any comments on this question?
Thank you very much, Nautica. But I think the context is the same, but in Africa is very bad. It's very bad than there. And being in the context of repeated war, the women on front line are victims of many things. I can talk about sexual violence, as Dázon said, murder sometime, repression, access of job to the activists is very difficult in our country. If you say that you are an activist, you are a member of citizen movement, you have many problems with the state, with the government, with the security service. It's many things. You'll be humiliated by your family. Sometimes you must be rejected in your family when you are an activist. It's very many problems that women are victims. Even not the activists, the citizen activists. I can talk about the almost women in Africa. As you know, the economy is shaped by the informal sectors, and many of the one who do the informal sectors is the women who carry out small business and field activities to take care of their families. That type of women are victims of many things, repression, are humiliated, are very many things, arbitrary arrests, violence. I can talk about more things, but in Africa, the problem of women are now, I can say it's je peux parler un peu en français et Annie va traduire. Donc, l'égalité des genres reste encore un grand blocage en Afrique. Annie, you can translate.
Dites-moi encore une fois la phrase.
OK. L'égalité du genre. Donc, l'égalité du genre reste encore un grand problème en Afrique.
Right. Equality for people is still a huge problem. And she talked a lot, as you know, the informal sector of the economy and how arbitrary the treatment.
Merci. Merci de revenir sur cet aspect-là. Donc, j'étais en train de dire que l'économie est plus informelle et cette économie est plus tenue par des femmes.
It depends much more on women, the informal economy that's so important in Africa. So it relies on women, but they're still arbitrarily arrested, subject to violence, subject to repression.
OK. Merci beaucoup. Donc, il y a cet aspect-là qui montre que vraiment la répression de la femme qui se met surtout sur la ligne de front reste encore un problème sérieux. Actuellement, plusieurs femmes de la lucha sont emprisonnées à Beni.
A lot of women who were involved in La Lucha were imprisoned, and she mentioned earlier that they were the targets, activists and attorneys.
Juste parce qu'ils étaient en train de réclamer la sécurité dans la ville de Beni.
I not get that one. Dites-moi.
Annie? Ils étaient en train de réclamer la sécurité dans la ville de Beni.
La ville de Beni, je ne.
Ouais. Ils étaient en train de réclamer la sécurité. He was asking for security.
In their.
He was asking for become of security in their country. Okay. But you can see in that context of war, it's very difficult to do the struggle because you are exposed in many things. Even if you're deaf, you're exposed to death, and every time activities are kidnapping, many things who expose the activities that we are. Many are going at exile and leave to the country. It's a big problem that we have as activists, as citizen movement in Africa. It's what I can say. Thank you.
I would ask around the security and the violence being enacted on folks who are stepping up to fight for equality in your country. Have you guys been able to think or talk about ways that you guys could kind of defend yourselves in that situation, or what? Yeah, just like what kind of self-defense or any kind of self-defense organizations have you guys been able to like think about or come to? That makes sense.
Thank you very much. What kind of self-defense that we product? As a group, we organize ourselves. Anytime you must change your location, you change the way that you live or the country that you live, you go in another country to protect yourself sometime, and there you can continue struggle in another ville, in another city. Other things, there is some organization who help us to protect ourselves. We can make a house, a safe house, what they call it, to protect some activities who is qui sont poursuivis, who is being looked by the government, and sometimes we don't have how to take care of us. You must prepare yourself when you choose to be an activist, when you choose to protect your community, when you choose to be someone who wants to help your community, you must prepare yourself, is what I can say. You must prepare yourself and be there waiting your time. We have lost many of us. Brother Emrino, our brother Luc, who was killed in her house. There is many brothers that we lose. Now we have lost more than five of us who was killed when there was asking of security, of human dignity, there is many things I can say, but we are prepared on that. When you choose to fighting as a citizen movement, you must prepare yourself to all of us. It's what I can say. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Vingi. That is, wow. Whew. Okay, take a breath. So, leading to the next question, the fight for reproductive justice has looked different over many decades and crosses many intersectional front lines. What opportunities for organizing for bodily autonomy and reproductive justice, especially during the public health crisis? So what opportunities are there for us organizing for bodily autonomy and reproductive justice, especially given the current pandemic right now? And we can start with you, Dázon.
Such a great and tough question, because the opportunities, and there's one way to look at them. Like, I think of how we always say, well, we don't want to call things problems, we want to call them opportunities. So, okay, we can start with that laundry list and end up down a rabbit hole, or we can look at opportunities as things that we have created as ways to find our wins, right? To find movement and progress. And I'll take a little bit out of both. I think that the opportunities right now, if we're in reproductive justice, to do a whole lot more work in collaboration and in coalition with racial justice, particularly along the lines of anti-Black racism and dismantling not only the systems, but the social behaviors and the social engagement that allows for that to continue. That those are pieces that we have to challenge all the time. We have opportunities, of course, to cross purpose issues with cross oppressions, for example, in the climate justice and economic justice fields. We already know that worldwide, I don't care how they talk about one region versus another region being more vulnerable to the worst disasters as it relates to climate change, women everywhere will experience the brunt of even those additional disparities. And so because of just some of the same issues that Vingi was just talking about, in terms of women who drive the market economy, the official, the formal and informal economies. Women drive the safety and security and nutrition for the families. Women get the water. Women bear the, and I'm not just talking about what we see in the global South context of women who are carrying gallons or liters and liters of water, but in the United States, whether it was in Flint or whether it's here in Georgia, it still is the women who are fighting for the safe drinking water, the potable water that we need. So we carry that water as well. The other opportunities from what we create though, and I am, a Gen Xer, but I am also pretty much in tune with what's happening in social media. Y'all don't see me there, but I see y'all there. I don't know what y'all call me for that, but I don't care what you call me. I'm paying attention. That's all that matters. So, but from a social media context, there aren't enough narratives out there around what we are doing in the political space, in the movement space, in the organizing space, in how we're raising these issues and how we're talking about them above and beyond the whatever, how many seconds you get in TikTok or Instagram or anything else, or how many followers you get before you can go live. I just even learned that was a thing. Loretta Ross, along with folks like Lone Tran and some other people, are creating a whole new opportunity for us to be together and organize differently across all of these crazy, hyper moments we have when we're going after each other inside the movement instead of going after where the real enemies are. So this whole thing of calling in versus calling out gives us a greater opportunity to build bridges, to offer grace, to heal hurts, and to find where we're alike in certain places and can do the work versus where we are divergent and different and even don't like certain things that people believe in. And then, of course, I will always come back to how we are elevating and making human rights a practical thing. How are we bringing it into everyday conversation? When people say human rights, do they really know what they're talking about? And are they really able to grasp onto something that they can do something with it? We don't have to wait for the United States to sign another treaty. We can take the human rights principles and apply them in our everyday lives, but we're not teaching each other enough so that we know how that applies in our lives and then how to make change out of that. So I think human rights, bringing it into a practical context, encompasses critical race theory, encompasses intersectionality, it encompasses all of these things that are fractioned and are continuing to divide us in conversation. There are ways we can hold these conversations and frameworks we can do this work in ways that dismantle a lot of that noise, or turn down a lot of that noise and dismantle a lot of those systems in terms of how we've even done our own organizing work. We have opportunities to do it differently.
Thank you, Dázon. So I would say that one huge opportunity is that we have been doing a lot of our own, especially considering the health crisis. We've already been doing a lot of our own health management, whether it's through indigenous practices or ancestral practices or whatever you want to call it. We've been managing our own health outside of government or systemic government or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a huge opportunity, is to tap back into that, especially with the way we've seen like mandates and all that stuff going out. Like clearly our government doesn't necessarily know what they're doing when it comes to this public health crisis. And so it does fall on us to do what we can communally amongst ourselves. I personally am one of those people that is like, we have to be the change we want to see on a global, more national scale. And so in our own communities, it's super important for us to tap back into that and help ourselves out, because we have that power. And another thing to add to that, to extend through that, is our mutual aid centers or mutual aid throughout the country. I think that also is an indigenous practice. That's an ancestral practice, but it's getting a research. And we also have, like Project South, we have a mutual aid liberation center, and part of that is providing resources that are needed in communities that are otherwise not necessarily available outside of some type of government assistance. And a lot of times in poor communities, you see that not actually being given out. It's scarce. And so being able to provide resources of free testings or whatever that is needed in our communities, I think being able to think communally about what we need and then going out to make that happen is a huge opportunity, because again, we have that power. We really do. So yeah, that's what I would say as far as the opportunities go.
Yeah.
During this health crisis.
I like that. It also gives us the opportunity to start just chipping away at the nonprofit industrial complex.
Yes.
That's what I think mutual aid does more than anything else from a structural standpoint.
Yes, and that's a big a huge thing that I learned through my work and through the time that I've been working in community organizing, is that not only do we have the power, but honestly, how do I say this? Like, it's imperative that we do it that way, because again, when you think about asking bigger conglomerates of people, or asking outside of ourselves, then we set ourselves up to continue this whole like tug and pull. You get what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. And I love this this mutual aid liberation process, and I can't wait to see it happen all over, not just nationally but globally. So yeah, totally.
And before you go to Vingi, I just wanted to throw just the two words in there that I think that blow up another whole part of the conversation, which is the other opportunity for us is the arts.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, because it's us telling what's going on in the times, what we're reporting about what's happening in the world, and not just on a mainstream level. It's more from the heart. It's more from the ground. That's grassroots too, in my opinion. So yeah, I totally agree. Awesome. Vingi, you're on mute, Vingi. If
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for Dázon for this experience. It's very good. What I can say is about sexual and reproductive health. Cultural still takes precedence over this issue. Now in Africa, to talk about your what I can say, to talk about your bodily autonomy. Your bodily autonomy is still a cultural problem, because now to use many think that to protect himself is look, I was saying about le planning familial, Annie, if you understand the planning familial.
Oui.
Can you translate about planning familial? Women to access on this program of planning familial is a taboo. Every woman has ils ont peur. Elles ont peur de tous ces matériels parce que la plupart, l'accès à l'éducation sexuelle reste encore faible suite à ces problèmes culturels-là.
So that everyone's afraid to talk about this because the access to sexual education is extremely weak, if not non-existent. And so there's no talking about it.
Thank you. And another part of this problem is about maternal mortality. Can you think as now in our country, we still live maternal mortality? You go give birth, but you are exposed to death when you are giving birth, because sexual education is still not active. Is that part I appreciate the experience of Dázon. I think after this meeting, we will continue to talk. How can you educate? How can you organize sexual education? Because it's very important for the women that we are. It's our body. We must know how to take care for it. And when we don't know what can we do, what we don't know, how to protect ourselves, we are still being exposed in many problems. I think to talk about reproductive sexual health, reproductive or reproductive problem is still is not what can I say? Is not exploited by several organizations, but we must think about how strategy to make on what can we do to help women and to stop mortality and many things, many consequences who come when women don't know about reproductive health. It's what I can say about this topic. Thank you.
No, I think you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, and you were kind of alluding to this, Nautica, but we have similar issues just in terms of young people. A lot of people, sort of box it into it being about young people not getting proper sex education. And I think that that's already problematic, because that means we're relying on our school systems to teach our kids about sexual health and education. And hallelujah, that is a bad idea as far as I'm concerned. I don't trust them. It's too localized. It's not going to be equitable. It's not going to be inclusive. It's not going to be progressive thinking in terms of all bodies, not just, bodies that have vaginas and penises that are supposed to go together in their minds. So I think there's a different conversation around having a community sexual health conversation that all ages get to learn at the same time in different ways, because we have mamas and grandmamas and great grandmamas that never learned it either and have only passed down what they knew. And then we have the layers of secrecy and shame and silencing and all of these other things about our sexual experiences. So those aren't the stories we tell, which is the stories we wish we knew. I mean, I can tell you, there's like 50 times I have said, going through menopause, I wish they had told me that this was a part of it, right? So there's all kinds of things that we can have at a community level that we haven't crafted yet. But what I think is most important is just that basic knowledge. You learn about your teeth, you learn about your ears, you learn about your underarms, you learn about your toenails, you learn about everything else and how to take care of yourself and protect yourself. But the very part of our bodies, right, that lend ourselves to either the most vulnerable spaces in terms of politics and politricks and policies and abuses, are also the very things that bring us joy and bring us pleasure and bring us love in some instances, maybe not the right order of things for some people. But either way, our sex and sexuality and our reproductive health and well-being, again, is the beginning and end to everything. It's a lot of time, but just in 2 seconds, I'll never forget the story of when I had my first chance to travel with Billy Avery. National Black Women's Health Project back in 1988. And they brought me because I was the only young thing running around showing people how to, use the speculum and see their own cervixes. I did self-cervical exam, still can, still will. Have speculum, will travel. So we go to Belize with 200 speculums, enough lube, mirrors, whatnot. And it's about giving people options. It doesn't matter that they're not comfortable talking about their sex and sexual health or reproductive health. It's how they want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it in a big group. Maybe they don't want to talk about it with me because you don't know medicine. So maybe you put them in a room with a nurse and they feel more comfortable, just the two of them. Maybe you put them in the room because we would do a whole group of self-cervical exam with like 10 of us in a room. Drop your jaws and show your cervix, right? Let me be less colloquial. Take off your clothes, show your cervix when you do a vaginal exam for yourself. We did over 200 women in one afternoon with 3 separate rooms, one for one-on-one with a nurse, one where there's just you and maybe 1 or 2 other women, and one where there was a group of you so you can talk and share together. At the end of that, you had 200 women running around waving their speculums. They never knew where their babies came from. They never had seen that part of themselves. They can't believe the power that they hold, that they think about how many children have passed through that teeny hole. One woman even says, "Oh, now I know why my husband loves me so much." I mean, it was just amazing experience just to have them connect in ways to their own bodies that they never knew before. And if we could do that for everybody, regardless of their sexual identity, regardless of their gender identity, all of those pieces, I think we would have stronger warriors in the fight because now they know what they're defending individually and collectively in ways that they didn't know before.
Wow, that's powerful. Actually, I want to get in on that. So
we can help.
Let's talk about that. Okay. Awesome. So we're coming close to time, and we're gonna spend about 10 to 15 minutes talking through this next question that will be about global connections. And for the folks listening, if you guys want to drop questions in the chat, that would be awesome as well. You can feel free to do so. Dázon, did you have anything else to say? Oh, okay. Awesome. So moving to our next question, or our last question, why is it so important to organize globally across borders? And what is one of the most significant global experiences that you have had that informs your work? And I'll start off with saying it's important to organize globally because of those intersections, because of the fact that a lot of our issues are experienced across the entire, like across the board. And you'll be, like for some of us, you'll be surprised to see how many of our issues are the same and where we can work together and even just share notes or talk about what we've been doing and what they've been doing and how we can, better our movement and better our organizing around those situations. And another thing too, and okay, I'm going to make it make sense. So I actually experienced the UPEC of 2018. I went to Senegal with a delegation of Project South team members, and something that was so significant, or experience that was so significant, was talking with folks about what they think life is like for Black people in America. And from there I learned that it's huge. It's important for us to be able to talk across borders, because there is so much miscommunication about who we are and what we experience, what we go through media, through the news, because it's all very biased and serves a particular purpose. And even on our end, I recognize, like, so on their end, there was like, you guys are rich, you guys are wealthy, and you live this life of luxury in the States, which was absolutely not true. And we got a chance to actually debunk that and tell them about some of the violence and issues that we face here. And on the contrary, I know living in the States for as long as I do, there's a lot of misunderstanding about life in Africa and life in the continent. And being in that space, I got to see that it's absolutely way different than what I saw on TV. So a lot of it was like we didn't own our narratives and we didn't own our story about who we were and what kind of lives we had, and just overall, like, I feel like a lot of our media dehumanizes us or over glamorizes us to a point where we just don't actually come off as the people that we actually are. So that was a huge experience for me, just being able to talk about that kind of stuff and actually clear up like there is struggle here. We do struggle here, and on the other end, there is luxury in Africa. There is beauty in Africa. There are certain structures that we just over here for a long time did not know, or at least were told that wasn't the case. So for me, I think being able to talk about our issues and work through them together, and then also having control of our narrative and having control of the stories that are being told about us and what we're experiencing, where we're at. So that's what I have to say for right now. And I'll pass it to Vingi.
Thank you, Nautica. I think it's a good opportunity to talk about this topic. As we know, a woman's problem is every woman's problem. The problem that arrive to American women are the same to African women. And this year's the term is gender equality today for a sustainable future. It's the best term, but as we know, women's equality is still a slogan. They talk as a slogan in several countries, in Africa, everywhere. And I think if we join our struggle together, it will be an issue who will help our struggle as women. As I can remember you, access to education still be refused in some, to the girls in many families. And that is a blockage, something who don't help women to continue to progress in political, in economy, in research, in many scientific programs. But if together we join our struggle, we define strategy, it will help every women. If women in Africa, in America, in Asia, in other country, if together we work to fighting this objective, it will be a best thing. Sometime in 2018, I participate in an evaluation of Beijing Agreement. It was it's Tunisia. You will be surprised by the report as the country who put 3025 resolution into practice. They are not more than 10. That 10 countries who gender equality is effective. is a big problem, because if we want to succeed our struggle, we must join our struggle. We must define our struggle together and propose strategy and to this fight remains a global priority. We must join forces to make women's participation effective and sustainable in the future. But I think that it is a big thing to do is very important to make it that a globally problem. It's not an own problem. It's a global, it's a general problem who must be talked in all the world. We must be an alert to all the women in the world, and to see if you are going alone, you will not arrive. We must going together. We must join our force to win this struggle. And I think this opportunity is the first of other opportunity who are coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vingi.
I can almost do the same thing again, Vingi. Thank you. Just say what she said. I did write a couple of things down though. I'm in absolute agreement, and I would probably start out that way. I think that first of all, for me personally, is this one person. For me, it's important to organize globally and across borders on the continent and otherwise, and that is in our continent, whichever continent we are, and that is because we are one, right? And there's that South African, the Zulu saying Ubuntu, which most people hear and know now, but what it really truly means is this is inextricable link that we have as human beings at the same time on this planet. I am because you are. We are because you are, right? That in and of itself is the core, the essence of the reason why it's important to organize globally. Because where I'm struggling, you're struggling, right? And vice versa. The other part that is significant about this conversation is that we're also saying it, but not saying it, that a lot of this is about centering. Now, I'm okay with saying centering where the center is. If the particular issue we're talking about, for example, is the oppression of sexual identity and sexual expression, then you're going to center our LGBTQ family in that. If it's about violence, and if it's about gender-based violence in any of the contexts, from conflict to in my home, then you're going to be centering Blackness or centering womenness in that, and then center Blackness inside of that. If it's about sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice, you are centering Blackness, period, and it's Black women that you're centering there. So the centering is critical, moving the margins to the center wherever we are in the margins. And it doesn't have to actually have to be that. If it's about reproductive justice, you better have an issue within reproductive justice of how you're moving the people living with different abilities to the center, right? It's about the diaspora. It's about storytelling. So if we're not telling and sharing our stories, because that's where my experiences come from, is how alike and akin. You don't have to give me the numbers to tell me who's rich and who's not as a country, because I can find people who are much more desolate and desperate in the United States than in sub-Saharan Africa in lots of places, right? So it is really about the lived experience and how we're sharing those stories with each other and how we're making sure those stories matter to each other. Most, for me, importantly, is because it's about the diaspora. I am absolutely convinced that once we connect and reconnect women, particularly in all our diversities, women of African descent, when we connect with each other and reconnect with women on the continent then becomes the restored global superpower it was and should always be. Think about a household where the mother is disrespected, the mother leaves, the mother dies, and what happens to a family and how that family has to struggle and find a way to survive. As long as the earth disrespects Black women, disregards us, discards us, and erases us, they will struggle like that same household whose mother has died. That's how critical Black women are to everybody's survival. And that's why organizing globally is critical for our survival.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all to the folks listening and being a part of this conversation and celebration of resistance and movement building. And we will share this recording and stay connected throughout the year. Thank you all for being here. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Dázon and Vingi. I appreciate talking to you both. Peace, everybody.